Hello and welcome shareholders, investors, and traders. Recently, one of our fellow shareholders, Joe, pictured here on the right, took some time to visit UAV Corp's facilities and get some of our questions answered. The full discussion is on Stocktwits for those of you wanting to see everything he posted, as well as the discussions from other shareholders about the trip and the company. There's also been further discussions on InvestorsHub, and both forums are linked in the description. Joe gave me the green light to relay his posts about his trip, so here you go, YouTube. Before we begin, I want to give a huge thanks to Joe for taking the time to go down last Friday to represent us shareholders. He said he had to drive 7 hours to get there, so that's definitely some dedication and demonstrates his effort to perform due diligence on the company. With that said, let's get into it. Joe summarized his trip in 2 posts. The first one said, I traveled to St. Joe and Weehawken, Florida, to meet Michael Lawson of UAV Corp on October 10th, 2025, for due diligence on the company. What has been stated in the public about the LOIs from countries and dollar amounts disclosed, I witnessed and seen were conservative. The $50 million term sheet, dated in October 2025, was also confirmed after I signed the non-disclosure agreement. There are conditions to the term sheet, but seems funding is on the way, and I was happy to see that. The pilot's entry into the US looks like it will be within the next few weeks. All documentation I reviewed matches what has been disclosed to the public. The company will be introducing new advanced technologies that seem to separate them from any competition. The new Senior Vice President Chief Technical Officer is overseeing all due diligence on technology purchases for UAV. The people on his team are highly experienced and have solid direct contacts worldwide. The facilities are equipped for the build-out of airships. The airport is about 58 acres. Joe then continued in his second post saying that he reviewed the plans for the new hangar. Mike stated that there will be announcements on confirmed dates for the weight balance test. I could not nail Mike down to a date. I encourage those investors that have questions should find the time, like I did, to visit the facilities and learn for themselves what's happening. Mike Lawson is a down-to-earth guy, honest and transparent. My take is, it all checks out. Bullish. In addition to the summary, Joe also provided photos about his trip, which we'll show in just a moment. For some context of UAV Corp's location, I want to show it on Google Maps. As you can see, UAV Corp is located in Florida's Panhandle. As mentioned on their website and financial reports, their corporate and manufacturing address is 115 County Road 381, Weehawken, Florida. Additionally, the 58-acre airport is located at the Port of St. Joe, so also in the Panhandle. Joe went to see both locations during his trip. Alright, time for some pictures. First up, we have some pictures of UAV Corp's facilities. I know there was some discussion on various forums like Yahoo Finance that UAV Corp's address was to a P.O. box. If that's the case, then this is the biggest P.O. box I've ever seen. Next up, we have some pictures of Lawson and airship plans. It looks like the company has collected a lot of records, be that they be for airship designs, company finances, or payload technologies. Here we have Joe and Lawson in front of the pilot's flight deck that goes inside the Dart SA-70 when constructed and inflated. As you can see, there's a lot of pieces involved with the airship. Unfortunately, we don't have pictures of the airship fully put together, but that makes sense in terms of storage. It doesn't make sense to have the airship constructed and taking up so much space when it isn't going through tests. After all, it wouldn't fit in the facility that we see here. Here are more angles of the previous location where we can see structural parts for the Dart SA-70, motors, and a close-up on the pilot seat. All these parts match up with previous videos that we looked at in our last bull and bear case deep dive video, so it's good to see some consistency. And finally, we have pictures of the Costin Airport at the Port of St. Joe. As you can see, this is largely a grassy area, which makes sense for UAV Corp's airships. It is better for the ships to launch and land on a grassy area since it is a softer area for testing. In Joe's Stocktwits post, when he said you'd be going to visit UAV Corp on October 10th, he also offered people to send him questions that he tried to get answered. I ended up sending Joe a ton of questions, and he was able to get some answers for us. Without further ado, let's dig into the Q&A. Question 1. What is the status of the $50 million term sheet? The answer? Anticipating converting into funds within a week. Question 2. What is the status of the $525 million in LOIs? The answer? They are still active and in place. This is good news because I was concerned that the company's delays would have frustrated some prospective customers and that they would terminate their LOIs. Could this still happen? Possibly, but this is still good news regardless. Question 3. Did UAV Corp attend Gemtech? The answer? No, but they had representation there. Now, I tried asking Joe for further clarification as to who represented UAV Corp. I mean, was it Atlantic Industrial Group or someone else? However, due to his NDA, Joe cannot clarify who provided the representation. We'll have to wait and see if there are any partners that are announced further down the line. However, I'm just glad that UAV Corp was still able to have some sort of presence, because that can open the door for future contracts. Question 4. What is the status for retiring the remaining debt? The answer? Upon receipt of the initial $50 million LOI, debt holders to be paid off. Question 5. How much longer can investors expect to see dilution? The answer? Ongoing until funds are received from the $50 million LOI. As a quick aside, I want to mention some very interesting trends in the UMAV trading volume last week. Since October 3rd, we've seen a significant downtrend in the volume. What I find crazy is that the volume last Thursday and Friday were at 5.3 and 4.7 million respectively. After all, we've been seeing volume in the tens or hundreds of millions beforehand, which has caused the 30-day average trading volume to be about 50 million or so. This begs the question, why so little? I mean, those of you looking at the bids for UMAV saw that there was over 38 million bids for 0.0005 on Friday, and sellers were only interested in selling at 0.0007 per share, near market close. It is possible that this is an indication that UAV Corp does not need to dump their shares at near all-time low prices. Furthermore, their partners and debt holders may not have shares available to immediately dump, or they're just not interested in selling at this time. Regardless of the reason, this supports the last Q&A that dilution is going to continue to pay off debt. Once UAV Corp receives funds from the $50 million term sheet, then they won't have an immediate reason to sell shares because the funds will pay off the remaining debt. No matter how you slice it, this is some very peculiar behavior, so I'm very curious to see how this week turns out. And just as a quick mention, while recording this video on October 13th, we saw a trading volume of about 19.5 million, with the share price at a high of 0.0008 and the day ending at 0.0007. The increase today might be because of investor excitement around Joe's report, so we'll see if this continues going forward. Now, if we see the outstanding shares continue to increase though, then this increase would be evidence of further dilution. If not, then this could just be investor excitement. All right, back to the Q&A. Question 6. Is UAV Corp considering a reverse split to achieve the OTCQB uplisting? The answer, no. Capitalization was from Joe and not me. This is great news for shareholders if we for sure don't see a reverse split. Question 7. When can we expect their next quarterly report? The answer? November 15th, 2025. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I'm really looking forward to seeing this report. If we see that debt is indeed paid off and the company has cash to jumpstart their hiring and manufacturing process, then I think that will be a massive bullish indicator. Question 8. What is the status of the pilot? The answer? Anticipate arrival in October, then ongoing trading with new pilots thereafter. Question 9. What is the status of the sensor division subsidiary? The answer? With the new hiring of the new Chief Technical Officer, he will implement new technologies in-house. Question 10. What is the status of the weight balance analysis? The answer? Before the end of October. Now, before we continue with the remaining questions, I want to give another aside. This one being on the pilot delays and why the weight balance analysis test keeps on getting pushed back. Alright, so why do we need this one very specific foreign pilot? After all, Florida is one of the biggest states for aviation and is home to many pilots. Why can't one of those pilots fly the Dart SA-70? And that's a great question. And a lot of us investors have been discussing that on various forums. I've talked to one of my coworkers last week, who is a pilot hobbyist, about UAV Corp situation, and he said it makes sense for the company to need a foreign pilot. This is because there are two piloting categories: heavier than air, or HDA, aircrafts, and lighter than air, or LTA, aircrafts. Both categories are further broken down into classes based on the aircraft type. The LTA category specifically has two classes, that being balloon, think of it as your hot air balloons, and airships, and think of that as your blimps. Typically, most pilots look at getting their HDA license since that's required to become a commercial airline pilot. There are also way more opportunities to get HDA licenses. In order for a student pilot to become a licensed pilot, they need to be trained by a certified flight instructor, or CFI, reach a certain amount of flight hours, and pass several exams. However, there are far fewer LTA pilots in the world because both LTA CFIs and available aircrafts to train on are much rarer. According to an article from 2022, there are 10 operational blimps in the world, and Goodyear operates 4 of them. Usually what happens is that aspiring blimp pilots go work at a blimp company like Goodyear, who has both the people and the blimps to train on. Given that blimp pilots are so rare, it makes sense as to why UAV Corp is relying on this particular foreign pilot. It sounds like this pilot has history with Lawson and the company, which would explain the level of patience that the pilot has demonstrated while UAV Corp has been trying to work with the US government for getting him a work visa. The good news is that once the pilot's work visa is obtained, UAV Corp can then proceed with the weight balance analysis test and resume the other milestones. This is the biggest reason why the weight balance analysis test keeps getting pushed back and why we haven't received a firm date yet from the management team. It's hard to pin down a date if you're relying on the government, who doesn't even know when they'll be processing the paperwork themselves. Now, UAV Corp has learned a tough lesson from this ordeal. So, they will have the pilot train additional pilots once in the US. This will remove a single point of failure going in the future. Given that UAV Corp is such a small company, these challenges make sense. Now, could they have done a much better job at relaying this information to shareholders? Absolutely. However, this is where we're at. Alright, now back to the remaining Q&A. Question 11. How soon can the flight tests happen after the weight balance analysis? The answer? 30 to 60 days. Question 12. How many flight tests have to happen to unlock the LOIs? The answer? Only one. They convert to contracts as witnessed by the customers. Question 13. Why are the post-February X teleconferences unavailable? The answer? They're not too sure, and Mike will look into this and repost them. Also, Joe reported that Lawson will look at updating the UAV Corp website, so this is both great to provide more information to shareholders, customers, and everyone else interested in UAV Corp. Question 14. Is UAV Corp pursuing government funding as per Executive Order 14307? The answer? Yes. Now, to remind everyone from the last video, President Trump's Executive Order 14307 orders the U.S. government to unleash America's military drone dominance. Section 8 of that executive order lists several avenues where the U.S. government can provide funding to aspiring drone companies, such as loans, equity investments, co-financing, and technical assistance. Needless to say, that if UAV Corp is pursuing these funding options, then that can provide more funding later down the line. Question 15. What happened to the Dart SA-70 flight tests in 2022? The answer? They're outdated, and new technologies have been implemented to be tested now. Overall, I'm pretty excited that we got these questions answered. and I look forward to seeing how the remainder of this year looks for UAV Corp. We also had another question from Cautious Optimist 1 on Stocktwits, asking if UAV Corp is still planning to buy back shares. Based on what Joe heard, that is still the plan and to be determined on how it is implemented in practice. If this works out, then that should help put more buying pressure on the stock and hopefully increase the share price. Keep in mind that this is still a plan and not set in stone. The final big question investors had was what happened to the 51 Labs partnership? Why did UAV Corp drop it? From what Joe was told, when UAV Corp added the new Senior Vice President, Chief Technical Officer, he stated he would bring the sensor technology that was very advanced, that would fit nicely with the optics packages, that both systems would be integrated into all the platforms. So, there is no need for Lawson to continue with 50 as the CEO there as well. Our fellow shareholder Insidia further asked for clarification on if the Senior VP CTO was Dr. Roy Hartfield, the current CTO listed on UAV Corp's website. Joe relayed that until UAV Corp has the large funding in the bank and strategic contracts closed, his name will remain under wraps. Dr. Roy Hartfield is still on the board as a subcontractor to Skyborne Technology for airflow dynamics and advanced propulsion and will report to the new SVP CTO. There is some skepticism from the bears about the new CTO since they feel the conditional appointment on the funding is a bit fishy. Usually, when a company board appoints an officer, they immediately announce the person's name for the purposes of transparency. Could there be a valid reason for withholding the new CTO's name? Perhaps. Maybe it's because the employment is conditional on the funding, and the prospective officer required a salary from UAV Corp. After all, the only way to meet a salary demand is for the term sheet to go through. Maybe, and this is purely my speculation, that revealing the new CTO's name would indicate a partnership with another group, which would be conditional on the term sheet. For those of you who remember the January 8th, 2025 press release on UAV Corp further reduces authorized shares to 500 million, rest in peace to that old authorized share cap being that low, there is a paragraph that provides some interesting information about the financing LOI. Back then, it was for $20 million, but we know that it was upgraded to an up to $50 million term sheet. I have the key lines highlighted here, in that UAV Corp has signed a letter of intent, LOI, for up to $20 million in funding, marking a significant milestone in the company's growth strategy. Under the agreement, the funding partner will complete the DART SA-70-12 airship project and retire the outstanding debt on UAV Corp's balance sheet, strengthening its financial position. So far, this matches up with what UAV Corp has posted on X. More importantly, as part of the deal, UAV Corp will grant the funding partner one board seat, ensuring strategic alignment as the company continues to scale operations and drive innovation. It is important to note that we've never received firm information as to who that funding partner is or what board position they'd receive. I've had past theories that maybe this was hinting at 51 Labs, but that partnership fell through. With the $50 million term sheet was brought up again on X, I thought that maybe it was a prospective customer who really wanted to get the DART SA-70 completed and out of the way for their DART 600 series of airships to get started. However, there is a slight speculative possibility that this new CTO is related to this funding partner. Do we know for sure? Nope. Only time will tell if and when UAV Corp releases an official press release on the $50 million term sheet. There's been a lot of conversations back and forth about UAV Corp from both the bulls and the bears. We've all faced the same recent setbacks from the company, and that's been awfully painful. However, as shareholders, we are all on the same team as the company. Have there been problems with the company? Absolutely. However, I find it encouraging to see the teamwork in our shareholder community for gathering information, asking questions, and spreading information about the company, both the good and the bad. I encourage shareholders to continue to ask tough questions and work towards uncovering the truth with this company. Now, yes, investor sentiment is low, and UAV Corp needs to work on building trust and confidence with the shareholder. However, their actions we've seen so far make sense given the circumstances. Their problems this year ultimately boiled down to toxic debt and government delays. Mixed in with those two problems is the lack of proper communication. I genuinely hope that we see efforts from UAV Corp to provide value to shareholders, and that we, as shareholders, are patient enough to give the company a chance to do so. Them giving investors a chance to tour their facilities and answering questions is a great first step in building trust. However, they still have a lot of work to do to regain lost trust and provide value to shareholders. It is important to remember, though, that UAV Corp is a company in its early stages. It is not a well-established company like Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, or any of the other Mag 7, so we should understand that there will be setbacks and problems with the company as they continue to build themselves out. While the CEO of the company is responsible for providing value to the shareholder, the CEO is also responsible for the long-term health and growth of the company. We live in a day and age where short-term measures are sometimes prioritized at the cost of unpopular long-term strategies. Debt is a dangerous disease that will destroy a company. Seeing Lawson make efforts to get rid of toxic debt as soon as possible seems to be a worthy effort while they have their hands tied with other roadblocks. After all, they can't do anything else with the company until they complete their tests. If the company goes bankrupt because they drown in debt, then there's really no point to any of this. Now, is UAV Corp guaranteed to work on the end? No. No company is. Even big ones will collapse if fundamental problems eat away at the company over time. So for those bearish, I ask you to have a hint of optimism. And at the same time, for those bullish, I ask you to have a hint of skepticism. The bears continue to raise reasonable concerns. I will continue to urge investors to consider both sides of the argument. Now, in the best case scenario where UMAV's stock price skyrockets, I highly encourage everyone to consider the facts that UAV Corp has announced and the costs associated with business. As much as I'd love to see the stock price go to the moon, I don't want to see people get burned by buying into the hype and lose their hard-earned money if the company fails to meet unreasonable expectations. Yes, there may be $525 million to $1.5 billion in LOIs, but it is possible that those deals do not become contracts. And if those LOIs are finalized, it will take time to produce airships and obtain the full contract amount for fulfilling the orders. Additionally, not all the money from the contracts will be net profit and go straight into UAV Corp's piggy bank. Producing these airships will have a cost in terms of hiring personnel, acquiring materials, and time. There are plenty of ways to determine a company's valuation, but I urge people to first and foremost consider the company's market cap relative to their contracts and debt. It is still very difficult to properly assess the company's valuation because of their debt, but this is how things go with companies at the early stage. Again, please exercise caution. Thank you all for watching, and a special thanks again to Joe for sharing your reconnaissance efforts. I hope that we get to see some good news come out of UAV Corp, and their company promises come to fruition. Thank you all, and have a good one.